My brother's voice was cheerful. Not warm, not shaken, not anything that matched the words he was saying. "Mom died last night," he said, like he was announcing the weather. "I inherited everything. You get nothing." I stood in the kitchen holding a mug that had already gone cold, sunlight creeping across the counter like it didn't know how to behave in a moment like this. The refrigerator hummed, a car passed outside. Somewhere down the street, a dog barked. The world continued exactly as it had before he spoke. "What?" was all I managed. He laughed softly, not cruel laughter, not openly, the kind he used when he thought he had won. "Don't act surprised, Lily. You moved out. You made your choices. Mom understood that." He said mom, but it didn't sound like he was talking about a person. It sounded like he was talking about a possession, like she was something he had finally been awarded. I pressed my fingers into the countertop. The stone felt solid, real. I needed that. "When did this happen?" I asked. "Last night, peacefully, according to the hospice nurse." He paused. "She didn't want you there. That's what she told me." A familiar sensation settled in my chest. Not grief, not yet. It was something sharper, something older. The quiet certainty of being rewritten. "You didn't call me," I said. "Why would I?" His voice held genuine confusion. "You made it clear you were done with family. You've been gone for years." Gone. I had lived 15 minutes away. "I was at the house every weekend," I said. "I took her to appointments, I handled the insurance calls, I filled out the paperwork for hospice." He dismissed it with a breath. "You helped out sometimes. That doesn't mean anything legally." Legally. There it was, the real word, the only word that ever mattered to him. "Anyway," he continued, light again, "I just thought you deserved to hear it from me before the lawyer contacts you." The mug in my hand trembled slightly. I set it down slowly so I wouldn't drop it. "There's a lawyer?" "Of course there is. Estate's pretty clean, actually. She updated everything 6 months ago. House, savings, investments, all mine." My brother, Mark, had always liked to speak in bullet points when he thought he was being efficient. He didn't hear the way his voice stripped the humanity from everything he touched. "Where is she now?" I asked. "At the funeral home. Arrangements are being handled." By him. Of course they were. "You're planning the service?" I asked. "Small gathering, private. She didn't want anything big." My jaw tightened. Mom loved big gatherings. She loved folding chairs in the backyard and paper plates and the sound of overlapping conversations. She loved to feel remembered. "She didn't want me there," I said quietly. There was a pause, a small one, but I noticed it. "That's what she said," he repeated. The call ended shortly after. He said he had appointments, paperwork, people to meet. I stood there long after the line went dead. My phone felt heavier than it should have. I didn't cry. Not then. Grief, I would learn, doesn't always arrive like a wave. Sometimes it creeps in slowly, through small cracks you don't notice, until the room is flooded. I sat at the kitchen table and stared at nothing. Memories tried to rise, but something else kept interrupting them. Mark's voice, so certain. "You get nothing." It would have hurt less if it hadn't sounded exactly like something he'd been waiting years to say. Growing up, Mark had always been the center of gravity in our family, not because he was kind, not because he was thoughtful, but because he was loud in the right rooms and charming when it counted. He was 2 years older than me, which meant he was first at everything. First to get attention, first to get excused, first to be believed. When we were kids and he broke something, I learned to accept that I would be blamed before I even opened my mouth. "You're more emotional," teachers would say. "Mark's just high energy." High energy was the phrase they used when he talked over me, when he took my things, when he decided my space was also his. I learned early that the safest way to survive around him was to become invisible, and I did that very well, except with Mom. With her, I never had to shrink. Mom saw everything. She noticed the way I arranged my pencils by color. She remembered which books I liked. She knew when I was lying just by the way my voice shifted slightly higher. When I was 13 and had my first real heartbreak, I sat on the back porch with her long after the house had gone quiet. She handed me a blanket and didn't ask questions until I was ready to speak. "You don't owe the world toughness," she had said. "You owe yourself honesty." It became one of the few things I believed in without question. When Mark dropped out of college for the second time, it was Mom who paid the fees so he could try again. When he crashed his car, it was Mom who dealt with the insurance calls. When he lost yet another job, it was Mom who let him move back home without a single lecture. I never resented her for that. Not really. But I noticed. I noticed the way her shoulders slumped more each year, the way her hands shook slightly when she thought no one was watching, the way she started keeping files in labeled folders when Mark stopped remembering his own responsibilities. By the time she got sick, I had already fallen into the role naturally, the one who shows up, the one who listens, the one who stays. When the diagnosis came, Mark called it complicated. Not the cancer, the situation. "She's exaggerating," he had said. "She's always been dramatic." Mom heard him sitting just down the hallway. She didn't say anything. I did. He called me sensitive, he called me intense, he called me exhausting. I kept showing up anyway. I took over the paperwork, the endless phone calls with insurance companies, the calendar of appointments that filled my fridge, the small details like soft blankets and soups that didn't make her nauseous and music that didn't give her headaches. Mark would appear when there were visitors. He would sit at the edge of her bed, tell jokes, post photos with captions about family strength and standing together. He was very good at being seen. When things got harder, when she needed help in the middle of the night, when the medication schedule became a maze, when fear started to sit in the corners of every room, he was suddenly very busy. Work, stress, life. I never kept score. Not out loud. But memory keeps its own ledger. 6 months ago, Mom asked me to drive her to see a lawyer. She said it casually, like she was talking about getting groceries. "Just to get things in order," she said. "It'll make everything easier later." I didn't ask what things meant. I knew. We sat in a small office with framed degrees and a plant that looked like it had been alive longer than either of us. The lawyers spoke gently, explained options, used phrases like peace of mind and planning ahead. Mom held my hand the whole time. Mark wasn't invited. I didn't mention it to him. It wasn't my place. When we left, she seemed lighter, like something heavy had finally been named and set down. "You don't need to worry," she told me in the car. "You've done more than enough, Lily." I thought she was talking about care, about time, about effort. I didn't know she was talking about something else entirely. Now, sitting in my kitchen with my brother's words echoing in the air, I picked up my phone again and opened our family message thread. The last message from Mom was from 3 days ago. "How are you feeling today, sweetheart?" I stared at the words until they blurred. I didn't reply. Not yet. I stood, grabbed my keys, and walked out the door. I didn't know where I was going at first. My body moved before my mind caught up. By the time I realized, I was already on the familiar street. Her street. The house looked exactly the same as it always had. Pale blue siding, white trim, the front garden I had replanted every spring because it made her smile. There was a car in the driveway. Mark's. I parked down the block instead of pulling in. Instinct, maybe, or caution. I sat there for a long moment, watching the front door. This house held my entire childhood. Every scraped knee, every whispered conversation, every moment that had shaped who I was. And according to my brother, I no longer belonged to any of it. I stepped out of the car and walked toward the front gate. The air felt heavier the closer I got, like the house itself knew something had shifted. I opened the gate quietly. The front door was unlocked. Of course it was.
Inside, the living room smelled faintly like lemon cleaner and something else I couldn't name yet. Something official, something final. Mark's voice floated from the kitchen. "I've already spoken to the lawyer. Yeah, everything's handled." He didn't see me at first. I stood in the doorway and watched him. He looked relaxed, comfortable, like a man who believed he had already won a game no one else knew was being played. I cleared my throat softly. He turned, startled for just a second before he masked it. "Didn't think you'd show up," he said. "I didn't think you'd lock me out of my own mother's life," I replied. He shrugged. Dramatic.
That word again. I looked around the kitchen. My kitchen. The place where Mom and I had stood side by side, chopping vegetables, sharing quiet jokes, talking about everything that never quite fit anywhere else. On the counter sat a manila folder. Thick. Official. My eyes went to it before I could stop them. Mark noticed. "Don't bother," he said. "It's all legal." I met his gaze. "I'm not here for the house," I said. He smiled, like that proved his point. "Sure you're not." "I'm here for her," I said. Something flickered behind his eyes, just briefly. Annoyance, maybe discomfort. "She's gone," he said. "You should accept that." "I know she's gone," I replied. "What I don't accept is you rewriting the story." He crossed his arms. "What story?" "The one where you suddenly become the devoted son. The one where I disappear from the picture entirely." He scoffed. "No one's stopping you from grieving, Lily. Just do it somewhere else." I stepped closer to the counter. My gaze lingered on the folder again. "You said she updated everything 6 months ago," I said. "Correct?" "At the same time she saw a lawyer with me," I added. He froze. Just for half a second. It was barely noticeable, but I saw it. Because I had spent my entire life learning to read him. "You were there?" he asked, too quickly. "Yes," I said. His smile tightened. "Well, then you know she made her wishes clear," he said. "Yes," I said slowly. "She did." He leaned back against the counter, confident again. "Then there's nothing else to talk about." Maybe there wasn't. Not yet. But as I looked around that kitchen, at the small details I had tended for years, at the spaces where Mom's presence still lingered, something else settled inside me. Not anger, not revenge, something quieter, something steadier. He thought he had told me the ending. He thought I would collapse under it. He thought I would believe his version. He was wrong. I turned toward the door. Mark watched me go, satisfied. He didn't need to. He thought the story was already over. Outside, the air felt sharper, clearer. I walked back to my car slowly, every step deliberate. When I sat behind the wheel, I didn't start the engine right away. I took out my phone, scrolled, found the contact, Law Office of Richard Halston. I stared at the name for a long moment. Then I pressed call. A receptionist answered with a calm, practiced voice. "Law Office of Halston, how may I help you?" "My name is Lily Moreno," I said. "I believe my mother was a client of yours." There was a pause. Not long, just enough. "Yes," the receptionist said gently. "I'm very sorry for your loss, Miss Moreno." My grip tightened slightly on the phone. "I'd like to schedule an appointment," I said, "as soon as possible." "Of course," she replied. "Mr. Halston will want to see you." That sentence landed differently than everything Mark had said. "Will want to see you." Not needs to, not if necessary. Will want to. We scheduled it for the next morning. When I hung up, I leaned back in my seat and closed my eyes. Grief finally crept in then, not as a flood, as a weight. Mom was gone.
That truth sat heavy in my chest, undeniable. But alongside it, something else had begun to take shape. Clarity. Mark thought he had inherited everything. He thought I had been erased. He thought I would quietly accept the version of events he handed me. He had no idea what Mom and I had actually discussed in that small lawyer's office 6 months ago. And he had absolutely no idea what I had kept copies of. The lawyer's office smelled faintly like coffee and old paper. Not unpleasant, just lived in, like a place where decisions lingered long after they were spoken. I sat in the same chair as 6 months ago, the same window to my left, the same quiet hum of the air conditioner. The difference was the weight in my chest. Back then, we'd come here with careful hope. Now I'd arrived with a grief that felt both raw and strangely sharpened. Richard Halston entered the room with a folder tucked under his arm. He looked exactly as I remembered him, calm, measured, kind without being soft. "Lily," he said gently, extending his hand, "I'm very sorry about your mother." "Thank you," I replied. He waited until I'd settled before sitting across from me. He didn't rush into paperwork, didn't launch into legal terms. He let the silence breathe for a moment, like he understood that grief needed space before it could tolerate structure. "How are you holding up?" he asked. The honest answer was complicated. "I'm functioning," I said. He nodded. "That's often enough for now." He opened the folder in front of him, slowly, deliberately, like he wanted me to follow every step. "Your mother was very thorough, more thorough than most."
Something in my chest tightened. "She wanted to make sure there would be no confusion," he added. Confusion. That was one word for what Mark had tried to create. "She spoke about my brother?" I asked. He met my eyes. Yes, she did. I held his gaze, bracing myself. "She was conflicted," he continued carefully. "Not about her love for him, but about the patterns she had seen over time." That sounded like Mom, always careful with her words, always trying to balance truth with kindness. "She was worried," he said, "that you would be overlooked, again." The word "again" hit harder than I expected. "You knew," I said quietly. He nodded. She made sure I understood the family dynamics. A memory surfaced then, sitting in this very room while Mom spoke in her gentle voice, trying to describe things that had taken decades to accumulate. The favoritism, the imbalance, the way certain burdens always seemed to land in my lap. She hadn't spoken with bitterness. She'd spoken with sadness. "I'd like to show you something," Halston said. He slid a document across the desk. Not a will, a letter. My name written at the top in my mother's handwriting. My breath caught. "I'm not supposed to give this to you yet," he said quietly, "but given the circumstances, I think your mother would want you to have it now." I didn't open it immediately. I just stared at it. Mom's handwriting had always been distinctive, loops that leaned slightly right, careful spacing, the kind of handwriting that looked like thoughtfulness on paper. "Before you read it," he added, "there's something you should understand about the estate." I looked up. "Your brother's statement that he inherited everything is incomplete. Incomplete. Not wrong, not true. Incomplete. Mark has been named executor," Halston explained. "That part is correct. Your mother believed it would make him feel trusted, responsible." I almost laughed. "She hoped it might be an opportunity for growth," he said. "But that role does not equal ownership." I sat very still. "There are provisions," he continued, "that do not become active until certain conditions are met." My heartbeat slowed, not from calm, but from focus. "What conditions?" I asked. Halston closed the folder slightly, not hiding it, just marking the gravity of what he was about to say.
Time, he said, and behavior. I blinked. Your mother designed the structure intentionally. She believed your brother might misunderstand his position initially. She expected that. I thought of Mark's voice on the phone, the confidence, the smugness. She wanted there to be consequences, Halston said simply, if he behaved exactly as he has.
A strange sensation moved through me. Not satisfaction, not yet. Something closer to recognition. She anticipated this, I murmured. Yes, he said. Of course she had. Mom had never underestimated patterns. She just hadn't always known how to interrupt them. Until now. She told me, Halston said, that she was tired of hoping he would change. She wanted the truth to speak for itself. I thought of the way she'd held my hand that day, the quiet determination in her eyes, the way she'd exhaled afterward like a long-held breath finally released. Read the letter, he said gently, then we'll talk. I picked up the envelope. My fingers trembled slightly as I slid the paper out. The first line alone nearly undid me. My Lily. Not dear Lily, not to whom it may concern. My Lily. I swallowed hard and continued. If you are reading this, then I am gone, and I know your heart will be heavier than you ever let on. You have always carried more than your share, quietly, without asking for recognition. I see that. I have always seen that, even when I didn't always know how to fix what needed fixing. Tears blurred the ink. I blinked them away and kept going. I need you to understand something clearly, because I suspect others may try to rewrite the story once I am no longer here to correct it. You were never secondary to me. You were never less valued. You were never invisible in this family. If anything, you were the one person I trusted without reservation. I pressed a hand to my mouth. I made choices in my life that I regret, not because I loved your brother too much, but because I asked you to be strong when you should have been allowed to simply be my child. I see now that strength became an expectation placed on you, rather than a quality celebrated in you. That was not fair. The words felt like hands reaching across time. You took care of me when I was afraid. You advocated for me when I was tired. You protected my dignity when I felt I was losing it. You did not do these things for reward, and I love you more for that. But love without protection is not enough. I wanted to leave you more than gratitude. I wanted to leave you security. I paused. The air in the room felt thick. I structured my affairs carefully. You will understand the details when the time is right. For now, I need you to trust that nothing about your brother's version of events is the full truth. I know he will believe he has won something. Let him believe it for now. Some lessons can only be learned by walking directly into the consequences of one's own assumptions. My breath left me in a slow exhale. You have always been patient, always thoughtful, always too willing to step back so others could take center stage. I am asking you for once not to do that. Ask questions, seek clarity. Do not accept the first narrative offered to you simply because it is delivered with confidence. That was Mom, even now, teaching. You are not invisible, Lily. You never were. And if the world tries to make you feel that way again, I hope you remember that I saw you fully, completely, without condition. The letter ended with her signature. Just Mom. Not Mom Moreno, not Mother, just Mom. I sat there, silent tears slipping down my face. Halston didn't interrupt. He passed me a tissue, waited.
She loved you deeply, he said when I finally looked up. I know, I whispered. The room felt different now, heavier, but also steadier. She expected this conversation, he said. She didn't know exactly when it would happen, but she planned for it. What did she plan? I asked. He studied me for a moment. Your brother believes the estate is settled, he said. He believes he has control. That belief is temporary. I held his gaze. Can you tell me more? I asked. Yes, he said, but not everything at once. Not because I want to withhold information, but because the structure your mother created relies on process. Process? I echoed. She designed it so that Mark's own actions would determine how things unfold. I thought of his confidence, his smugness, the way he'd spoken like a victor. He's already acting, I said quietly. Yes, Houston agreed, and each action leaves a trail. I leaned back in the chair, mind racing. What am I supposed to do? I asked. For now, he said, nothing publicly. That surprised me. Your mother anticipated that you might be tempted to confront him immediately, he added. She specifically asked me to advise you against that. Of course she had. She wanted him to reveal himself, not to you, to the legal process. I thought of the folder on the kitchen counter, the documents Mark had already begun handling, the calls he'd likely already made. He's probably already making decisions, I said. Exactly, Houston replied, and some of those decisions may prove problematic. I didn't smile, but something in my chest shifted. Here's what I can tell you today, he said. Your mother did not disinherit you, quite the opposite. I looked up. You are a central part of her planning, he said, but not in the way Mark believes. The words hung there between us. Trust the process, he added, and keep records of everything your brother says and does regarding the estate. I thought back to the phone call, the words he'd used, the claims he'd made. I pulled my phone from my bag and opened the Notes app. I began typing. Date, time, exact words. I didn't know yet how much it would matter, but I knew Mom had taught me to pay attention to details. Outside the office, the sky had shifted to late afternoon. Clouds stretched thin and pale across the horizon. I sat in my car for a long moment before starting the engine. I didn't feel lighter. Grief still sat heavy in my chest, but beneath it now was something else, a thread of purpose. Mom had trusted me with more than care, more than patience, more than strength. She had trusted me with truth, and she had built something around that truth, something that had yet to reveal itself fully. My phone buzzed. A message from Mark.
Short, cold. Funeral is Friday, 10 a.m. Don't be late if you're coming. If. As if I were a guest to my own mother's goodbye. I stared at the screen. Then I opened my notes again. New entry. Date, time, content. I didn't reply. Not yet. When I got home, I placed Mom's letter on my bedside table, not hidden, not tucked away, where I could see it. That night, sleep came in fragments. Memories drifted in and out. Her voice, her laugh, the way she used to hum when she folded laundry. Between those memories, another awareness began to grow. Mark was confident because he believed the narrative he had constructed. He believed Mom had chosen him. He believed I was irrelevant. He believed I would fade quietly. And because of that belief, he would move too quickly, speak too freely, act too boldly. He would make mistakes. I didn't know what those mistakes would be yet, but I knew this. Mom had designed this carefully, and she had trusted me to pay attention. The next morning, my phone rang. Mark again. I let it go to voicemail. A few seconds later, the notification appeared. New voicemail. I didn't listen to it right away. I opened my Notes app instead. Another entry. Then I opened my calendar. Friday, funeral. I didn't know what would happen between now and then. I didn't know how this story would unfold, but I knew something with absolute clarity for the first time since his call. My brother thought this was over. He thought the story ended with me getting nothing. He thought the power dynamic had finally tilted fully in his favor.
He was about to learn that my mother had always been paying attention, and so had I. The funeral home smelled like lilies and furniture polish, the kind of place where grief was expected to behave itself, where voices lowered automatically, where every movement felt slightly choreographed. I stood near the entrance for a moment before going in, not because I was afraid, but because I needed one quiet second to gather everything I was carrying. Mom deserved that. Inside, the room was already filling. Soft music played somewhere overhead. Chairs were arranged in neat rows, their symmetry almost too perfect for something as messy as loss.
Mark stood at the front, near the framed photograph of Mom that had been placed beside the urn. He'd chosen a picture from years ago, before the illness, before the exhaustion had settled into her bones. She was smiling in it, sunlight on her face, eyes warm. It was a good choice. I'd give him that. He noticed me almost immediately. His posture shifted just slightly, like a man who didn't expect resistance but still wanted to assert dominance. "Lily," he said when I approached. His voice was appropriately subdued, public version Mark, the one people trusted. "Mark," I replied. We stood there, siblings in name, strangers in every other way. "I didn't think you'd come," he said quietly. "I didn't think you'd tell me not to," I answered. His mouth twitched, almost a smile. "I didn't say that. You implied it." He glanced around, aware of nearby ears. "Let's not do this here." "Then don't," I said simply. He studied my face, probably searching for something. Weakness, emotion, reaction. I gave him nothing. Behind him, guests were beginning to gather. Neighbors I recognized, old family friends, people from church, the nurse who had come during the last weeks. They saw me, they approached me, and one by one they said things that Mark hadn't anticipated. "I'm so glad you're here," Mrs. Alvarez said, squeezing my hand. "Your mother talked about you constantly." "You were such a comfort to her," the hospice nurse added gently. "She felt safest when you were around." "She was so proud of you," someone else murmured. Mark heard every word. I saw it in the way his shoulders stiffened slightly, the way his eyes flicked toward me more often than before. The narrative was already shifting, not because I said anything, because truth has a way of surfacing when it's been buried too long. The service began. People took their seats. The officiant spoke softly about love and legacy, about the way one life ripples outward into countless others. Mark gave a eulogy. It was adequate. He spoke of memories, of gratitude, of how difficult the past year had been. He didn't mention who had been there for the long nights. He didn't mention who had handled the endless details. He didn't mention who had held Mom's hand when fear crept in. But he did mention himself, repeatedly. "I did my best to honor her wishes. I know she trusted me." The words felt rehearsed. People nodded politely. Then something unexpected happened. The officiant stepped forward again, glancing at a small card in his hand. "There was a request," he said, "from your mother herself." The room stilled. Mark turned slightly, just slightly, curious, cautious.
"She left a note with the funeral home," the officiant continued. "Something she wished to be shared today." My heartbeat picked up. I hadn't known about this. He cleared his throat and began to read. "My family has always been complicated," the officiant read, his voice steady. "But love does not always arrive in equal measure, nor does effort. If you are listening to this, I hope you will remember that the people who show up quietly, consistently, without applause, are often the ones carrying the greatest weight." A murmur moved through the room. I felt eyes shift toward me. The officiant continued. "I was blessed to have someone beside me who did not seek recognition, who did not demand credit, who did not perform love for others. She simply lived it. That kind of presence is rare. That kind of devotion is not invisible, no matter how hard others may try to make it so. The room was silent now. Please honor her, the note concluded, not by grand gestures, but by telling the truth about what you witnessed. Speak clearly, remember accurately. That is all I ask. The officiant folded the card. That is the end of her message, he said quietly. No one moved for a moment. Then slowly, people began to turn toward me. Not dramatically, not with spectacle, but with recognition. Mark didn't look at me. He kept his gaze fixed forward, jaw tight. The rest of the service passed in a blur. Condolences, embraces, whispered memories, and beneath it all, an undercurrent that hadn't been there before, awareness. By the time the room began to empty, Mark was no longer standing confidently at the front. He lingered near the doorway instead, watching as people approached me. "Your mother spoke so highly of you," they said. "She told me you were the one keeping everything together," someone admitted. "I didn't realize how much you were doing," another added. Mark heard it all. I saw the shift happening in real time. He had believed this moment would belong to him, that his version would go unquestioned, that I would arrive small and leave smaller. Instead, something else was happening. Not a confrontation, not a scene, a quiet correction. He waited until the last guests had gone before approaching me again. The room was nearly empty now, just us, the urn, and the soft hum of overhead lights. "That was unexpected," he said. "So was your phone call," I replied. He studied me. "Did you know about that note?" "No," I said truthfully. He exhaled slowly. "She always did like her little surprises." I looked at the photo of Mom beside us. "I liked truth," I said.
He didn't respond to that. Instead, he said, "The lawyer called." I turned my head slightly. "Did he?" "Yes," he said. "Apparently there are procedural things." "Procedural," I echoed. He nodded. "Documents, timelines. He wants to meet again." "When?" I asked. "Monday." I met his gaze fully for the first time since this started. "Do you know why?" I asked. His expression shifted just enough to be telling. "Probably just formalities," he said. "You know how lawyers are." I thought of Halston's calm voice, his careful words, his warnings. I doubted this was about formalities. "I'll be there," I said. He hesitated. "You don't have to be." "Yes," I said. "I do." He held my gaze for a moment longer, then looked away. "Fine," he said. "Monday." He walked out without another word. I stayed behind for a few minutes after he left, not because I needed closure from the room, but because I needed to say goodbye. I approached the urn slowly, placed my hand beside it. "Thank you," I whispered. Not just for the planning, not just for the foresight, but for seeing me, for believing I would be strong enough to handle what came next. Outside, the air was crisp, clean. My phone buzzed again. Not Mark this time, an unfamiliar number. I answered cautiously. "Is this Ms. Moreno?" a woman's voice asked. "Yes." "This is Karen Ellis. I work in the records department at Valley Trust Bank." I froze. "I apologize if this is an unusual call," she continued, "but your name came up in relation to a recent inquiry regarding one of our client accounts." My grip tightened on the phone. "What kind of inquiry?" I asked. "Your brother, Mark Moreno, contacted us yesterday," she said. "He requested access to information regarding several accounts associated with your mother's estate." That didn't surprise me. "What concerns me," she added carefully, "is that he identified himself as the sole beneficiary and attempted to authorize changes that may not align with the documentation we have on file." I didn't speak. I listened.
We have internal protocols for situations like this, which is why I'm reaching out to you directly. How did you get my number? I asked. It was listed as an alternate contact on several documents. Several.
Mom had been thorough indeed. What kind of changes did he try to authorize? I asked. There was a pause. Transfers, she said. Closures. Reallocations. He was already acting like everything belonged to him, moving fast. Too fast. Nothing has been approved, she added, but we felt it was important you were aware. I appreciate you telling me, I said. Given the circumstances, she continued gently, you may want to speak with your attorney sooner rather than later. I have an appointment, I said. Monday. Good, she said softly. That's good. We ended the call shortly after. I stood there for a long moment, phone still in my hand. Mark wasn't just assuming, he was acting, making moves, trying to cement his narrative before anyone could question it, which meant exactly what Halston had warned me about was already unfolding. Mistakes. Monday couldn't come soon enough. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table again, the same place where this all began, but I felt different now. Not numb, not overwhelmed, focused. I opened my notes app and reviewed everything I'd recorded, the phone call, the statements, the claims, the timing. I added the bank call, date, time, content. Patterns were beginning to emerge, not emotional patterns, behavioral ones, predictable ones, the kind Mom had spent years quietly observing. I thought back to the times she'd gently intervened when Mark pushed too far, the times she'd stepped in not to shield him from consequences, but to protect others from his lack of awareness. She had stopped doing that toward the end. I'd noticed it, but hadn't understood it fully. Now I did. She hadn't been giving up. She had been letting go of control so that truth could finally surface on its own. My phone buzzed again. A text this time. From Mark. Lawyer moved the meeting to 9 a.m. Don't be late. Don't be late. The same phrasing he'd used about the funeral. Commanding.
Assumptive. He still thought he was in charge. I didn't reply. Instead, I opened my calendar and set a reminder. Monday, 8:30 a.m. Arrive early. Not to make a point, but because I wanted to be fully present when the narrative finally cracked. That night, sleep came easier than it had in days. Not because the grief had lessened, but because something else had taken root alongside it. Certainty. Mom had not left chaos behind. She had left structure. She had left intention. She had left a plan that extended beyond her own life. Mark believed he was operating in a vacuum. He believed he could move quickly and cleanly and without consequence. He had no idea how many threads he was already pulling loose. And on Monday morning, when he walked into that office expecting to finalize his victory, he was going to discover something he had never truly prepared for. He was not the only one my mother had trusted. Monday morning arrived with a kind of clarity I hadn't felt in weeks. Not peace, not relief, but the sort of focus that comes when the fog finally lifts and you can see the shape of things clearly enough to stop guessing. I arrived outside Halston's office at 8:22 a.m., not to be early on purpose, just because I couldn't sit still in my apartment any longer. The building looked the same as always, quiet, neutral, unassuming, but today it felt like the threshold of something bigger than paperwork. I sat in my car for a moment, hands resting on the steering wheel, breathing slowly. Mom had done this once already. She had sat in this same parking lot, preparing to walk inside and make decisions she knew would ripple outward long after she was gone. I owed it to her to walk in steady. Inside, the receptionist looked up and offered me a soft smile. "Good morning, Miss Moreno. Mr. Halston is ready for you."
I followed her down the familiar hallway. Same carpet, same framed certificates, same calm. But when I entered the conference room, I realized I wouldn't be alone this time. Mark was already there. So was Halston. And seated beside Halston was a woman I didn't recognize, a laptop open in front of her, posture upright, expression unreadable. Mark looked up as I entered. His mouth curved into something that was supposed to be confidence. "You're early," he said. "So are you," I replied. Halston stood when I walked in. "Good morning, Lily." Just Lily, not Miss Marino, not formally distanced. That small choice wasn't accidental. "Good morning," I said, taking the seat across from Mark. The woman beside Halston closed her laptop gently and looked at me. "This is Miss Patel. She is a forensic accountant." Mark blinked. "Why is there an accountant here?" he asked too quickly. Halston folded his hands on the table. "Because your mother's estate is more complex than you appear to believe."
The room shifted. Not dramatically, just enough. Mark leaned back slightly. "We've been over this. The will is clear." "Yes," Halston said calmly. "The will is clear, but the will is not the only instrument your mother put into place." Mark's jaw tightened. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. Halston slid a folder across the table toward Mark, thicker than the one I'd seen on the kitchen counter. He opened it, flipping through pages quickly, then slower. "What is this?" he asked. "Documentation," Halston replied, "of actions you've already taken." Mark looked up sharply. "Actions?" "Phone calls, emails, requests for transfers, attempts to access accounts you were not authorized to modify." Mark glanced at me. A flicker of suspicion passed through his eyes. "You've been talking to the bank," he said. "No," I replied calmly. "They've been talking to the lawyer." Halston nodded. "And to Miss Patel." Miss Patel opened her laptop again, typing briefly before turning the screen slightly toward Mark. Charts, dates, timelines. He stared at it, confusion giving way to irritation. "I'm the executor," he said. "I have the right to manage the estate. You have the responsibility to manage it according to the parameters your mother established. Those parameters are more restrictive than you realized." Mark scoffed. "That's not what the documents say." Halston didn't argue. He simply opened another folder. This one he slid toward me. "Lily," he said, "you've seen some of this before, but not all." I looked down. Tabs, labels, organized. I didn't touch it yet. I watched Mark instead. His confidence was thinning. Not gone, but no longer effortless. "What restrictions?" he asked. Halston's voice remained steady. "Your mother anticipated that you might attempt to consolidate assets quickly. She also anticipated that you might represent yourself as sole beneficiary before the estate had been properly administered." "That's because I am the sole beneficiary," scapped Mark. "No," Halston said simply, "you are not." Silence fell. Not heavy, not dramatic, just absolute. Mark laughed once, short and disbelieving. "That's not funny." Halston didn't react. Miss Patel didn't react. I didn't react. "I reviewed the will myself," Mark said, voice rising slightly. "It names me." "It names you," Halston agreed, "in one document of several." Mark's laugh died out. "What several?" he demanded. Halston leaned forward slightly. "Your mother created a layered structure, a will, a trust, a series of conditional provisions, each designed to interact with the others." Mark stared. "She did not want her estate to be treated like a prize to be claimed," Halston continued. "She wanted it to be treated like a responsibility to be earned." I felt something shift inside me. Earned. Mark shook his head. "You're making this more complicated than it needs to be." "No," Halston said gently. "Your mother did." He turned to Miss Patel. "Please."
Miss Patel rotated her laptop toward Mark again. "This is a timeline," she said calmly, "of your actions since your mother's passing."
"What several?"
he demanded. Halston leaned forward slightly. "Your mother created a layered structure, a will, a trust, a series of conditional provisions, each designed to interact with the others." Mark stared. "She did not want her estate to be treated like a prize to be claimed," Halston continued. "She wanted it to be treated like a responsibility to be earned." I felt something shift inside me. Earned. Mark shook his head. "You're making this more complicated than it needs to be." "No," Halston said gently. "Your mother did." He turned to Miss Patel. "Please." Miss Patel rotated her laptop toward Mark again. "This is a timeline," she said calmly, "of your actions since your mother's passing. Dates, times, phone calls, attempts to access accounts, emails to financial institutions, requests to change beneficiaries. Some of these actions," she continued, "occurred before the death certificate had even been filed." Mark's face drained slightly of color. "That doesn't mean anything," he said. "I was preparing." "Preparing to move assets that did not yet belong to you," she corrected. Halston folded his hands again. "Your mother included what is known as a behavioral clause in her trust," he said. "It is uncommon, but it is enforceable." Mark blinked. "A what?" "A behavioral clause," Halston repeated. "A set of conditions that determine how assets are distributed based on the actions of those involved." Mark turned toward me suddenly. "You knew about this?" I held his gaze. "No," I said truthfully, "not until recently." Halston nodded. "Your mother did not want Lily burdened with knowledge of every detail. She wanted her free to grieve without strategizing." Mark let out a harsh breath. "So what, exactly, are you saying?" Halston's voice didn't change. "I'm saying that your belief that you inherited everything is incorrect." The words settled into the room slowly. "I'm saying," he continued, "that your recent actions have already triggered several clauses your mother intentionally built into her estate plan." Mark stared at him. "Triggered?" "Yes. Consequences." The word hung there. Consequences. The thing Mark had spent his entire life narrowly avoiding. "What consequences?" he asked, but the question lacked its earlier force. Halston opened the folder in front of him and slid a single document across the table toward Mark. "Start there," he said. Mark read. I watched his face. The confusion, the denial, the slow realization that something was very wrong. "What is this?" he asked quietly. "A provision," Halston said, "stating that any attempt by the executor to misrepresent their authority, conceal information from other beneficiaries, or prematurely move assets results in immediate review and potential removal from the executor role." Mark looked up sharply. "Removal?"
"Yes," Halston said. "Effective immediately, given the documented attempts you've already made." Mark's gaze darted between the papers, the laptop, Halston's face, then finally, to me. "You did this," he said. I shook my head. "No, you did." His mouth opened, then closed again. He looked back at Halston. "This is ridiculous. You can't just—" "We can," Halston said calmly, "because your mother gave us the authority to." "Yes," Halston said. "Effective immediately, given the documented attempts you've already made." Mark's gaze darted between the papers, the laptop, Halston's face, then finally, to me. "You did this," he said. I shook my head. "No, you did." His mouth opened, then closed again. He looked back at Halston. "This is ridiculous. You can't just—" "We can," Halston said calmly, "because your mother gave us the authority to." He turned to me.
"Lily," he said, "your mother named you as secondary executor in the event that Mark failed to meet the conditions she established." Secondary executor. The words landed with quiet weight. "I didn't know," I said. "I know," Halston replied. "She didn't want you to feel responsible for managing his behavior. She wanted the structure to do that for you." Mark's voice cut through the air. "You made her do this, didn't you?" I looked at him, not with anger, not with triumph, just with clarity. "She made her own decisions," I said. He shook his head, almost desperate now. "No, you were always in her ear, always manipulating." Halston intervened gently. "That's not accurate, Mark." Mark ignored him. "You've always played the victim," he said to me, "always the quiet martyr." I listened. I didn't interrupt. I didn't need to, because Halston spoke next. "Mark," he said, "your mother's decisions were documented over years, in writing, in recorded conversations, in revisions she initiated herself." He slid another folder forward. "This is not a sudden plan," he said. "It is a long-considered one." Mark stared at the documents like they might dissolve if he looked at them hard enough. "They're biased," he said weakly. "She was sick, vulnerable." "She was lucid," Halston replied, "consistently, thoroughly, and very clear." Miss Patel spoke again. "I've reviewed the financial structure. It is meticulous, intentional, and designed to be resistant to exactly the kind of behavior we are discussing." Mark's hands curled into fists on the table. "So what now?" he asked, voice low. Halston looked at him steadily. "Now," he said, "you face a choice." Mark looked up. "You can contest this. You can attempt to challenge your mother's intentions. You can initiate a legal dispute that will require scrutiny of every action you have taken since her passing." Mark's jaw tightened. "Or," Halston added, "you can accept the structure she created and allow the estate to be administered according to her wishes." Silence. I felt the weight of it too. This wasn't about winning. It wasn't about punishment. It was about truth.
And accountability. Mark finally looked at me again. "Are you happy now?" he asked quietly. The question wasn't angry anymore. It was something closer to wounded. I considered it carefully before answering. "No," I said. "I'm grieving." He swallowed. "But I'm also done pretending that your version of things is the only one that exists," I added. Halston nodded once. "Well said," he murmured. Mark looked down at the documents again. The confidence that had once defined him was gone now, replaced by something rawer. Uncertainty. He had built his entire stance on the belief that he had already won. That belief had collapsed, and in its place stood the truth Mom had been quietly building toward all along. Halston closed the folders gently. "We will schedule a formal review," he said. "All parties will be notified. For now, I strongly advise you, Mark, to cease any further attempts to access or modify estate assets." Mark didn't argue. He didn't speak. He simply nodded once, stiffly. The meeting ended shortly after. Mark left without another word. No grand exit, no confrontation. Just a man walking out of a room where he had expected to be crowned, only to discover he had never been in control at all. Halston turned to me once the door closed. "You handled that well," he said. "I didn't do anything," I replied. He smiled faintly. "You stayed present. That's more difficult than it looks." Miss Patel packed up her laptop and offered me a small nod. "She was wise," she said simply. I knew who she meant. When I stepped outside, the sunlight felt different than it had that morning. Not brighter, just clearer. My phone buzzed again. A text from Mark. One line. "We need to talk." I stared at it for a moment.
Then I set the phone down. Not because I was avoiding him, but because, for the first time, I understood something fully. This wasn't my fight. It never had been. It was the consequence of years of choices finally catching up. Mom hadn't designed this to hurt him. She had designed it to reveal him. And now that the reveal had begun, there was no going back. Not for him.
Not for me. Not for the story he thought he controlled. The final part of this was still coming. I could feel it. Because structures like the one Mom had built don't collapse all at once. They unfold, deliberately. And the next phase would not happen in a quiet office. It would happen in the open. The silence after everything changes is never as peaceful as people imagine. It isn't relief. It isn't closure. It's a strange, suspended moment where the old reality has already fallen apart, but the new one hasn't fully formed yet. That's where I found myself in the days after the meeting. Mark stopped texting. The bank stopped calling. The lawyer's office went quiet except for short administrative emails confirming dates and filings. On the surface, it looked like everything had settled, but underneath, I could feel it, something unfinished. Because stories like ours don't end with paperwork, they end with truth, and truth always wants an audience. The first crack appeared 3 days later. I was grocery shopping when my phone rang. Unknown number. I almost ignored it. Almost. Lily? A hesitant voice asked when I answered. Yes? This is Aunt Carol. I hadn't spoken to my aunt in over a year. Not out of hostility, just distance. The kind that accumulates when everyone orbits around the same person, and you quietly slip out of view. Oh, I said. Hi. There was a pause, then a long exhale. I owe you an apology. That caught my attention. For what? I asked. For believing your brother, she said quietly. For not questioning things when I should have. For letting you carry everything while we all pretended not to see it. I leaned against the shopping cart. What happened? I asked gently. She hesitated. Mark called a family meeting. Of course he did. He wanted to clarify the situation, said the lawyer was trying to manipulate things, said you were behind it. I almost smiled. Almost. And? I asked. And then he started contradicting himself, she said quietly. First, he said Mom left everything to him because he trusted him most. Then he said the lawyer twisted her intentions. Then he said she wasn't fully lucid when she signed anything. There it was, the unraveling. People started asking questions, she added. Real ones, not the polite kind. What kind? I asked. The kind like, she said, why were you the only one managing her finances if Lily was the one actually taking care of her? Why did you tell everyone you were handling hospice when the nurses all knew Lily's name? Why did you tell people Lily abandoned the family when she was there every weekend?
I closed my eyes. Not from pain, from recognition. He got angry, my aunt said. Defensive. Started blaming everyone. You, the lawyer, the bank, the system. Of course he did. But no one defended him the way he expected, she added softly. Because once people started looking back honestly, they saw what you had been doing all along. I swallowed. I should have seen it sooner, she said. We all should have. There was no satisfaction in hearing that, just a quiet ache. I'm not calling to fix things, she added quickly. I know I don't have that right. I wanted you to know the story is shifting. Not because you forced it, but because it was never sustainable in the first place. We ended the call gently. I stood there in the middle of the produce aisle long after the line went dead. The story was shifting, not because I had spoken louder, not because I had fought harder, but because truth, once revealed, has momentum.
The second crack came through social media. A cousin I barely spoke to posted a photo of Mom, not the funeral photo, not the polished one Mark had chosen, a candid one. Mom sitting on the back porch, blanket over her shoulders, smiling softly. The caption read, "Thinking about how much strength comes in quiet forms. Some people show up without needing to be seen. They deserve to be remembered too." The comments followed. People sharing their own memories. People mentioning rides to appointments, late-night pharmacy runs, paperwork help, phone calls answered, hands held. And my name started appearing again and again. Mark's name appeared rarely. When it did, it was usually paired with hesitation, with silence, with awkward phrasing. The narrative he'd tried to solidify publicly was dissolving organically, not through confrontation, through recollection. The third crack was more direct. He showed up at my door. No warning, no text, just a knock. I stood on the other side of the door for a moment before opening it, not because I was afraid, but because I wanted to notice what I felt. It wasn't anger. It wasn't dread. It was neutrality. That surprised me. When I opened the door, he looked smaller than he had in the lawyer's office, not physically,
Energetically. His posture lacked the familiar certainty. "I won't stay long," he said. "Okay," I replied. He hesitated, then stepped inside when I didn't move. He looked around my apartment like he was seeing it for the first time. Not with judgment, with uncertainty. "They're all looking at me differently," he said. I didn't respond. "Everyone," he added. "Family, friends, people I thought were on my side." Still, I stayed quiet. "I didn't realize—" He trailed off. "What?" I asked softly. He looked at me, really looked at me. "How much you did," he admitted. "How little I actually contributed." The words sounded unfamiliar in his mouth, unpracticed, almost painful. I waited. "I thought being there sometimes was enough," he said. "I thought saying the right things counted for more than the rest of it." "And now?" I asked. He exhaled slowly. "Now I see I built my confidence on assumptions." That was closer to truth than I'd ever heard from him. People are asking me questions I don't have answers to. About Mom, about the estate, about everything. I held his gaze. "And what are you asking yourself?" I asked. He didn't answer right away. Then, quietly, "Why didn't I notice sooner?" The question hung there, not between us, inside him. "That's something you have to sit with," I said gently, "not something I can solve for you." He nodded once. "I know." We stood there in silence for a moment. Then he said the thing I never expected. "I'm sorry." Not loudly, not dramatically, not with expectation, just softly. "I'm sorry I erased you, in the story I told myself, in the story I told everyone else." I didn't rush to respond, because apologies are not about performance, they're about presence, and this one felt real. "I can't undo the damage," he added, "but I don't want to keep pretending it didn't happen." I studied him, not for weakness, but for sincerity. It was there, fragile, unfamiliar, but there. "You don't need to perform remorse for me," I said quietly. "You need to live differently from here forward. That's the only part that matters." He nodded once. "I know." We stood there another moment. Then he turned toward the door. "Thank you," he said, hand on the knob. "For what?" I asked. "For not humiliating me when you could have," he said. "For not destroying me when you had every right." I thought of Mom, of the structure she had built, the restraint she had modeled, the long view she had taken. "I didn't need to," I said. "Truth does that on its own." He looked back once more, then left. The final resolution didn't arrive with drama, it arrived with documents, a revised executor structure, shared responsibilities, a transparent process, legal acknowledgement of my role, formal recognition of contributions, not as a reward, as a correction. Mark didn't contest it, not because he was forced, but because something inside him had shifted. The estate settled according to Mom's actual intentions, not the imagined version. The house was sold as she'd planned, the funds were divided as she'd structured, the scholarships she'd quietly arranged were funded, the donations she'd designated were made. Her legacy unfolded exactly as she intended, quietly, intentionally, truthfully. Months later, I returned to the back porch. Not the house, the new place I had moved into. Different space, same sunlight, same kind of peace. I sat with a cup of tea and Mom's letter. Not because I needed to reread it, but because I liked knowing it was there. The story had completed its arc. Not because my brother lost, not because I won, but because the truth was finally allowed to exist without distortion. He thought the ending was, you get nothing. The real ending was simpler. I got my voice. I got my clarity. I got my place in the story restored. And more importantly, I got to live forward without shrinking to accommodate someone else's narrative. Mom had seen me all along, and in the end, that had been enough to reshape everything. Not loudly, not dramatically, but permanently. Some legacies are built in property, some in money, some in structures and clauses and documents, and some are built in the quiet certainty that the truth, once planted carefully, will grow exactly where it's meant to, even after we're gone.